click on the muscle guy.
Yeah.
Right, that's the only one we do is the muscle guy, the Challenger.
Right, so we just did the Cheddar's one too on that, by clicking and right, and we print it out.
You'll print it out. You might have time today if we finish chapter 3.
If not, then I might just stay, like.
You
in
can
my
stay.
winter, Like tomorrow. Since I have
You
class
can
tomorrow.
come in and stay and work on it. Just check the schedule on the door, and I think that Sarah already posted that.
Yeah, you can see.
On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think it's open until 6 o'clock. And it's open in the morning too. All right, so in chapter 3, we're going to be looking at a journal. We're going to journalize, which means that we're going to analyze the transaction, which we already did in chapter 2. What accounts are affected, what's their category, increase or decrease, debit or credit, the ACID questions, ACID. Then we're going to do what we'll never ever get away from in accounting, and that is to post. And posting is taking information from the journal and putting it into the ledger. When we're computerized, when we click the enter key or the save button, it posts automatically. Posting is probably the most time-consuming thing that we will do in accounting. Some of our practice problems that we'll do in class, I'll only have you post certain things so that we can speed up the practice. But in your homework, you'll need to do all of your posting. So posting is transferring from the journal into the ledger, and then we're going to prepare a trial balance. It's very similar to what we did with the T accounts. But when we had the T accounts, and we had numbers on the left side, numbers on the right side, we had to add everything up, and then we had to foot those totals so that we knew what the ending balance was in the account. What if we had to do that every time we wanted to know how much was in each account? Time consuming? A real pain? Yes. So when we take the information from the journal and we put it in the ledger, and each account will have its own ledger page, we'll know immediately how much the balance is for each one of our accounts because we could look at it in the ledger. Every account will have its own ledger, what we call a page, because remember my old-timey posting machine where I had to pick up the ledger page, put it in the posting machine, post the amount, pull the ledger page out and file it again. I had to manually do that. We haven't gotten away from those terms. We still refer to it as a page, and we could print just a page for cash. So I guess technically page is still correct because we could just print off cash or accounts receivable. Why would it be important to know what our balance is in cash?
Because that's like the money, and if like there's something off, then that would be a bad thing if like
We could be overdrawn, couldn't we? And then we'd have to be paying a fee. Years ago, back in the late 70s, I worked in a hardware store in Virginia, in the office. But before we could make payroll on Friday, the owner of the business went out to try to collect his accounts receivable. Not a good thing when you're waiting on your paycheck and we don't have the money in the account. Are there businesses that operate that way?
Yes.
Yes.
They tell you have a couple of days.
Yes, scary.
They'll write the check and say you can't cash it.
You can't cash it for a while because we're still trying to collect our accounts receivable. Well, he would go, his last name was Mitchell. The store was called Mitchell Sales. I can't think of his name. But he would go and try to collect the accounts receivable so we could have payroll on Friday. Okay, I didn't stay there for very long, but it was a good experience. It was a good experience to learn how they do inventory in a hardware store. They weigh 100 nails, And then when they weigh all of the nails, they can calculate how many nails they had when they did inventory. Fascinating. You know, they did have a computer, but I also worked at a store that's down on 410 that's a patio store, patio furniture store and Christmas store. I never can remember the name of it. It's close to where Scrivener's used to be. And it was an internship that I had there. And it was to share with my students about working retail. I had never worked retail. I'd worked as a secretary, I'd worked as a teller. But they wanted us as business teachers to have experience to share with students working retail. And their inventory was on little tick marks on like an index card. Their inventory, if they bought 16 chairs, they had 16, and as they sold the chairs, they put a little tick mark so they knew they just had 14 chairs left. So not everybody uses a computer. I don't know whether they use a computer yet. I haven't been back to that store since I did that internship. But those experiences that you can get are just, they're priceless. A little nerve-wracking though when you got ready to cash your paycheck and the owner was collecting accounts receivable to make sure that we had a plus in the cash. We're going to journalize, which is just analyzing and recording the business transactions in the journal. The accounting cycle. The normal procedures that occur during whatever period of time we're looking at, whether it's a week, a month, a quarter, a year. It's usually a year, but it doesn't have to be the calendar year, which is January to December 31st. It could be what we call a fiscal period or a fiscal year. If I were the manager at Dillard's, would I want to be closing my year December 31st?
No.
That's my busiest time. We're busy trying to have returns from Christmas, getting the new year started. A lot of people are off work, so they're shopping. So when could my year end be?
September.
I don't even know when it is, but let's say it's September, except that's, the back to school's probably already over.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be after the Labor Day holiday, because that could be a big shopping time. But it's whatever 12 months we pick. If you had a boat store, you sold boats, you wouldn't want your year end to be sometime in the summer. That's probably your busiest time. Would December 31st be a good time for a boating business? Maybe. Okay, but you get to pick. And then you have to stick with that. We have to be consistent. We can't change next year and say, oh, I want my year end to be in September. No, we already said it was going to be in December. So there's a difference between calendar year and fiscal year. Now, how do I know that December has 31 days?
Nothing.
We're going to count it out. And when you're sitting for the CPA exam and you're calculating interest by day, if it's a 30-day loan that we're calculating the interest on, we need to know what day it's going to be due. We need to know whether it was the first day of the month or whether it's the 30th day of that month, whenever that loan started. The accounting period is the period of time covered when we report on the income statement. It could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. It doesn't matter. And then the natural business year ends at the slowest time of the year. Those monthly and quarterly, weekly, we call those interim reports, because when we look at the statement of our business, the condition of our business, our investors are going to look at what we've done for the year. So that's usually, we'll usually have our financial statements printed off at the end of the year, whenever we think the end of our year would be. The journal is sometimes called the book of original entry. It's the simplest form of a journal. We're just going to list and we'll look at a picture of one, the date. We're going to list what accounts were affected, and we're going to just use a general journal. In some accounting books, there are special journals, cash receipts journal, cash payments journal, a sales journal. When you do chapters 11 and 12, chapters 9 and 10 in my accounting tutor, they talk about special journals. The Slater book used to have special journals in that edition, and now he's gone back to just the general journal, and I'm not sure why. But we can have special journals. All transactions are located in one place. They're in chronological order, which means what kind of order? From the earliest to the latest, it's just by date. And then information is then transferred to the ledger. What's that last step called?
Posting.
Posting. Okay, posting. All right, there's our chart of accounts again. We're going to look at that when we're looking for what accounts to use. Again, our assets start with a 1. Our liabilities in this book start with a 2. Owner's equity start with 3. Our revenue are 4 accounts, and then our expenses are 5. Is this set in stone that that's the only way that we can list accounts? No. No. What did I do? Touch the little ruler bar on here. And this could be 5,000, 4,000, 3,000. It just starts with that initial number. When we're trying to figure out what accounts to use, we can always refer to the chart of accounts. If we don't have a chart of accounts, we kind of have to guess what those accounts are. If we're purchasing a vehicle, if we don't have in our assets vehicles or automobiles,
You gotta make one.
we're going to have to figure out what that is. They may not tell us exactly what the account is. Not all of our problems will have a chart of accounts. Formalities, when we journalize the transaction, the debit always comes first. All right, so we'll list the debit first. The credit comes second, and it's indented about a 1/2 inch. Not all accounting books show that the credit is indented. I like the credits indented because if we had the initial investment of the owner and they invested cash and office equipment, do I know which one is the credit without looking at the amounts?
Yes.
I do, because what's the credit?
The capital, because it's in.
It's indented a 1/2 inch. Right? I like the credits indented, but not all books will show them indented. It just makes it easier to identify what the credit is. This is the initial investment. These two were increased. This is the debit. This is the credit. I really prefer the credits to be indented. It's just so much easier to identify. Underneath the credit, we're going to write an explanation. The explanation in our book sometimes starts over here. I think whoever did the slides for this book didn't know much about accounting, so they kind of did it stair step. It doesn't have to be indented. It could come back over here. What would be a good description for this transaction?
Initial investment by owner.
Initial investment. Would we have to say by owner? Because
No.
we know it's by owner, it has the capital.
Capital.
Initial investment.
Uh-huh.
I always like to say with your description, okay, it's, you recorded this in January when the company started, and it's September. And the auditor is standing over you like this, asking you why you recorded that transaction. Whatever description you have there, you need to be able to look at that description and say, oh, the owner gave us cash, $10,000, and gave us $50,000 worth of equipment. Write the description so that it's your backup. And there will be someone coming in from the outside to audit you. There'll be somebody from the inside the business to audit you first as a rehearsal before you get the auditor to come and ask you questions. Accounting has lots and lots of checks and balances. Being audited is one of those. So we want the explanation to be clear. We also have enough space to skip a line between the transactions. Makes it easier for me to grade. It also gives you an extra line if you've made a mistake to go back and put another account in there. So always skip a line. Total the debits and credits to make sure that they equal before you go to the next account, and each transaction must affect 2 accounts, at least 2. It could affect 15 accounts if we want to, but it has to affect at least 2 accounts. Let's look at a journal entry. On May the 1st, Brenda Clark began the business by investing $10,000 in cash. What accounts are affected?
Cash in the capital.
Cash in the capital, and it's Brenda Clark, comma, capital, and it was $10,000. What's the category? What is the cash?
Asset.
An asset. What is Brenda Clark, comma, capital?
Proprietorship.
Or owner's equity. It's the capital account, so it's an owner's equity. It would look just like this, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I might not have to ask all of those questions if I know that cash in that transaction was the debit. And how do I know that?
It comes first and then capital's invented.
And we don't really have the word received in there, do we? Or paid. That kind of gives it away if we received cash. It just said she began the business by investing. She's giving us $10,000. So here's what our transaction is going to look like. Cash and Brenda Clark, comma, capital. All right. Here's a picture of a journal. Now the journal has a page number. It's not always going to be page 1. And remember, I told you it's a general journal. And it has several columns. The date, the account titles, and the description. And then it has a PR. Does anybody remember what the PR stands for?
Post reference.
Post reference. That's going to tell us where the information came from, where the information went. It's kind of our backup. Because we have to post this, don't we?
Yes.
To the ledger. Here's our debit, here's our credit, and there's our description. The description does not have to be indented. It could go back over to the left. I think whoever did the slides didn't know much about accounting.
Okay. And then
They
you would
just made
skip.
it look pretty.
That's then after
Then you
that.
skip a line.
Okay.
Skip a line here,
And
and
then the
then you're
next
ready
one.
for the
Okay.
next one.
Okay.
Now notice how the date is written. We have the date,
Yes.
we have the month, we have the year right up above it, and then we have the day of the month.
To the
You
right.
don't need to write this part again until we go to the next month. So if the next one is on the 3rd, we'll just put a 3 here.
Okay.
Okay, we don't have to write this part every time. But we know which one is the credit even if we don't have this,
Right.
because the credit is indented. All right. Why am I not advancing? Oh, it is advancing. It's
Yeah.
just telling you what I just
What it
went
is.
over. Okay. The next one, purchase word processing equipment from Ben Company. That should have been capitalized, shouldn't it? For $6,000, paying $1,000 and promising to pay the balance within 30 days. We purchased word processing equipment. We paid for part of it, and then we promised to pay the rest. Kind of an entries is going to be
Compound.
compound. Right, so what accounts are affected?
Equipment goes up. cash
Okay,
goes,
and it's word processing equipment, that's probably from our chart of accounts.
okay,
Word processing equipment,
goes
and it went up,
cash goes down. And
cash
then
is going down, and how much was the cash?
$1,000.
1,000.
And then we're gonna go,
We're
accounts
making a promise to pay, so it's accounts
payable
payable for how much?
for 5,000.
5,000. Compound entry, our debit's going to be, and I'm going to abbreviate, word processing equipment, and we had cash, and we had,
Accounts payable.
okay, what was the cash? Was 1,000, wasn't it?
Yes.
And this was 6,000,
Yes.
and this was 5.
5,000.
Now, you might have to ask those acid questions. What accounts were affected? What's the category, increased or decreased, debit or credit? What happened to word processing equipment?
Went up,
What happened to cash?
went down,
What happened to accounts payable?
went up.
Went up. Am I in balance?
Yes.
You just have to add it up and make sure. Don't go to the next one, skipping a line, unless you add this up. Do we have any questions on this one when we look at what it should look like in the journal? How could we have analyzed this without asking all of those questions with the acid test? We had two numbers. We had the 6,000
And the 1,000.
and the 1,000.
If we know that cash was affected, there's gotta be another one to equal up
We-
to the word
And
processing.
we paid cash, didn't we?
Yes,
So
cash.
cash we knew went down with the credit. And if we have word processing equipment and that went up, that's an asset
Right?
and that is a debit. You still might have to look at the T accounts from that demo problem to see where the normal balance is for that account.
Correct.
Our description, purchase of equipment from Ben Company. I really would prefer the Ben Company being on this line, and I like to see a diagonal here with Ben Company written in, and I like to see a diagonal right here. This account with the Ben Company has to be posted twice when we get ready to post, and we've already opened up what's called a subsidiary ledger. We're going to post it to accounts payable, but we're also going to post it to an account called Ben Company. So if you'll just get into the habit, if they tell us who it's from, and not all of them do, just put your diagonal and put Ben Company, then we could just say purchase of equipment and put a diagonal right there. That's one of the examples where I'll only have you post the accounts that have a diagonal in them. We have to post this part of the transaction twice eventually. Okay, if you forget while we're doing chapter 3, it'll still be okay, but then you'll have to remember to do that when we get to the subsidiary ledger chapter. Purchase of equipment was our description. Good enough for purchase of equipment for the description? Yes. It's a compound entry. Oh, and only the day was entered. See, we didn't have to write the May again. May the 1st, we had another transaction. Rented office space, paying $1,200 in advance for the first 3 months. We paid $1,200, didn't we?
Yes.
Now, we haven't paid for office space ahead of time yet, have we?
No, we don't have a written expense yet.
And we're not going to expense it. We're going to put it in an asset account. And it's a different name. It's going to be called a prepaid account. That was on our chart of accounts. It's an asset. We could have prepaid rent, prepaid insurance. Those are probably the only two that we'll see. Anything that we're prepaying, because remember, we're going to record it when we pay the cash, but we're going to expense it just for that fiscal period. And we'll expense it with what we call an adjusting entry later. So right now, we're just putting in the asset account prepaid rent. How would I know that was prepaid rent? I'd have to go back and look at the chart of accounts. It's listed under the assets, prepaid rent. Our credit is the cash because we paid. I don't think we needed to ask ourselves all of the questions, did we? What accounts are affected? What's their category? Increase or decrease, debit or credit? My description says rent paid in advance, and I also wrote down how much it was for 3 months.
Prepaid rent is an asset, you said?
It's an asset. We're not going to, now some companies can expense when they're paying something like this and call it rent expense, but we're paying it ahead of time, so we're going to put it in the asset account. It's money that we really didn't owe yet, did we? That's something of value. Let's say we canceled our lease. Could we get that money back? Probably. Okay, so it's something of value. All right, on the 3rd, we purchased office equipment from Norris Company on account, $600. Purchased office equipment, and we're making a promise to pay. What 2 accounts are affected?
Office
Supplies and
equipment.
accounts payable.
Office supplies and accounts payable Norris Company, and that's what it's going to look like. Again, I would like to see the diagonal, because here, the Norris Company, it made us take 2 lines on the description. Diagonal Norris Company, diagonal, just to remind us later we have to post it twice. Are we still in balance?
Yes.
May 7th, completed sales promotion pieces for a client and immediately collected $3,000. Worded a little differently, but what did we get?
Cash and expense
Cash.
and fees.
Cash is going to be our
Up.
debit. It's going to be our debit. It's going up. And what was our revenue account? I
Word
don't know.
processing
We have
fees.
to go back several
Word
slides.
processing
Word
fees.
processing.
Was it word processing fees? Okay.
Yes.
So word processing fees would be our credit, and then cash is our debit. Cash received for services rendered. Do we need to know who that was for?
That's what I was going to ask. No,
Not
because it was
really.
cash.
It's cash.
It's cash.
So we don't keep track of who that was for. Are we still in balance?
Yes, ma'am.
And look at our description, cash received for services rendered.
How did you know it was word processing?
We had to look at the chart of
Chart of
accounts several slides back, and I didn't go back, but I think Isaac did.
It's on our
It's in-
PowerPoint.
It's on like the page.
Oh, see, you all
beforehand.
can still see your slides over to the left, so go back a couple slides, and you can see the chart of accounts. Did we have word processing fees under the revenue? The 400 accounts?
Yeah.
I just didn't go back and look.
Yes.
411 and
It's 411 word
Okay.
processing fees.
And notice we don't have any account numbers on here. All right, on May the 13th, we paid office salary, $650. Paid.
Cash goes down.
Cash is a debit or a
Credit, because it goes down.
And what does the other account have to be?
the debit.
And what account would it be?
The office salaries
We
expense.
have to go back and look. Okay,
Office
office salaries expense, and then the cash. When we do Peachtree, the computerized accounting problems, I always have you print the chart of accounts first so we know what accounts we have. Are we in balance again?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
our description was just payment of office salaries.
Yes, ma'am.
On the 18th, advertising bill from Al's News Company comes in, but we didn't pay it. We have to record it when we get it. If we're not paying it right now, what account is affected?
Accounts payable.
Accounts payable. And accounts payable would be our debit or our credit?
Or credit.
Credit.
And what would be the debit?
The advertising expense.
And again, we could put the Owl's News on the same line with the accounts payable.
So every time that we have an accounts payable, you want the slash and who it is, and then the other slash stating that we also have to go to the other
Yes,
ledger.
we're going to have to eventually post it twice.
To another ledger stating.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
'cause
But
that's gonna-
that's still a couple chapters from now.
Okay.
But if you'll get into the habit of doing it now, it won't be something new that you have to learn when we get to that chapter. And you also don't have to write Owl's News down here. You're putting it up here.
Now I have a question. Would that be broken down into subsidiary accounts, like accounts payable with?
Yes.
And then each one of
Owl's
them
News.
is
all of
512
them.
or so on and
Yeah.
so forth. They'll be
They'll
broken
have-
down that way. It'd have its own number because it's a payable
The
account.
subsidiary ledgers in this book don't have numbers, but most of them do in other situations.
So we know
He just
exactly what
doesn't
it
use
counts.
numbers
Okay.
in this book. Yeah. Good question, because we're going to eventually getting there. This, remember, we're just taking those little baby steps. And I like the way he introduces it just a little bit at a time so that it's not so overwhelming. If we had learned the journal on the first day,
You'd have an empty
it would have
classroom.
been too hard, wouldn't it?
You'd have
So
an
the
empty
expanded accounting equation, we already did this in the expanded accounting equation, didn't we?
Yes.
We already did this in the T account. Now we're just putting it in the formal statement, the journal.
Yes, ma'am.
Brenda Clark wrote a check on the bank account of the business to pay her home mortgage payment of $625.
Oh.
Can she do that?
Yeah, she's older.
But we have to keep track of it, don't we?
Yes.
Brenda Clark, comma, withdrawals, and then cash. This is where we might have an auditor hanging over us, asking us why we paid that mortgage. I think I would write more of an explanation there, because there's a check floating out there somewhere, isn't there, to her mortgage company. It said we wrote the check to the mortgage company, not to her. So I would write an explanation, what check it was, what mortgage company it was, what month it was. We paid it on the 20th of May, but was it May's mortgage payment?
No.
I don't know, it didn't say. I would write down what it was. I might even put the account number. I would put a little bit more information there, because if the auditor's hanging over my neck, asking me, why did you pay Brenda Clark's mortgage? Because they just have the copy of the check. Too many questions asked. Remember, we want to leave a good paper trail, a good explanation of why we did that.
Some company.
Is it easy to embezzle money from a business?
Yes.
It might take, it is.
It is. It's not that hard.
As the owner of the company, you need to have trustworthy employees.
A good bookkeeper.
And you need to have someone come in from the outside to audit.
Yes.
Could be your auditor that's embezzling.
That's easily done.
Lots of people in Camp Cupcake in Alderson Prison by embezzling money. Okay. And it's hard to track cash, isn't it?
Very hard.
Very hard. If we found $20 in here, could anybody identify that that $20 belonged to them? No. You know, there are just lots and lots of stories that can be shared when it comes to cash. And when we talk about cash in a later chapter, I'll share some of those with you. It's very hard to track cash. Some of you might be thinking, I just want to have my own business. I'm not ever going to do any of this.
Okay.
But you have to know what's going on, or your shrewd employees could be robbing you blind.
Plus, if you ever need a loan or something, you have to have that. the knowledge
You
of.
have to you have to know. You have to know the financial status of your business. And know enough to say, something's not adding up. My bank deposit's not adding up. How easy is it to take the cash out of a deposit and only deposit the checks if you're an employee, a teller at a bank? Takes two to open up the night deposit, but what if you have two unworthy employees? Could the cash disappear? Yes. Okay. And as the owner of a business, it's your responsibility to balance that checkbook also, to see if those deposits are going in the way they should be. On May the 22nd, billed Morris Company for a sophisticated word processing job, $5,000. What accounts are affected?
Accounts receivable.
Accounts receivable, because they didn't give us the money, did they? Was accounts receivable a promise to pay, and then what's our other account?
Word processing.
fees.
The fees, the revenue account. So there's our accounts receivable. Again, I would like the diagonal here and the Morris Company. Then you don't need this.
We
And
wouldn't
we-
have to put the bill, we just have
You
to
would
put
have
fees
to
in.
have billed for fees earned.
Okay.
We would know it's
Who it is.
Morris Company if we put it right here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to, I won't mark it wrong, but I'd like for you to get into the habit of doing that. We'll have to do it eventually. We're still in balance, aren't we? Always look at your debits and credits when you're recording them in the journal to make sure that it equals. On May the 27th, paid salaries, $650. What happened to cash?
Went
Went
down,
down.
so it'll be our credit.
It's our credit, and what's our debit going to be?
Office salaries.
Office
expense.
salaries expense. Okay. We're still in balance. On May the 28th, paid half of the amount owed for the word processing equipment purchased May 1st. Again, accounts payable, I would put the diagonal there. We knew that that was the debit because cash is our credit from the word paid. And then the last one, received and paid the telephone bill, telephone expense, and then cash. Now, we might have to look at our chart of accounts to see if we had a telephone expense account. Sometimes we just have what's called utilities. And in a business, utilities could be your electric, your water, your telephone. Nowadays, telephone can vary. It used to just be a set amount every month. Now your telephone bill can be,
Wi-Fi and all that other stuff.
so you have other charges there. So utilities, water, electricity, if we don't have electricity expense or water expense.
And garbage.
Garbage is included in that too, and that's usually in with your water. All right. The next part of this is going to be posting.